Hi all, my name is Puneet. I'm part of Informatica GCS team. In this today's video, we'll just discuss like what is unified engine and hybrid mapping. The agendas of this session will be the introduction and then Elastic Cluster startup, and then like we'll also see like how we can see the default Elastic clusters, and then like the cluster life cycles, and then the demo. So when we talk about hybrid mapping, right? Hybrid mappings are something like, it combines both CDI plus CDI elastic, or like you can say it is a regular mapping plus an advanced mapping. So example, like you have a source which is a CDIE supported source. Like an example, it's a SQL SQL connection, native connections, and then like the target you may have like MongoDB V2. So the MongoDB V2 is kind of supported only in an elastic mapping. So now when you use a source as an SQL and the target as a MongoDB V2, and if you run a mapping in an advanced mode, then this mappings are called as an hybrid mapping, where the source is something supported on CDI and the targets are something supported on Elastic. But your mapping validation will not fail, though it is an advanced mapping. It just run a mapping, but it kind of create two different tasks. One for CDI to read the data from SQL endpoint, and then like it kinds of write the data to MongoDB by using a Spark task. So this is what it is mentioned here in the introduction. So we support both CDI connector, but except the real-time connectors with all the elastic mapping features. The mappings usually splits into multiple CDI and CDI tasks. So the data across CDI and the Spark is shared by using a staging location. That means like when you read when we run a hybrid mapping, once it reads the data from the source, it actually stays the data. So the data will be staged as Fark format, and it gets cleaned up once the job is completed. And usually we identify the connectors based on the category. Any connectors which are not registered with the DA scale connector is called as CDI connectors. So that will be created as a CDI task. So the CDI submappings is executed only on the agent machine, that is by using a PC DTM process, whereas like the Spark mappings or like Spark task will be uses the Elastic clusters. So when it comes to Elastic cluster setup, the advanced mappings is supported in all the three ecosystems like AWS, Azure, and GCP in both ephemeral and the single node concepts. So when there is a cloud specific, like, when do we use this elastic cluster? So we do the stage the data like by using S3, ADLS Gen 2, or GCS, also local disk. So it all depends on the cluster type which you are using it. If you are using AWS, then we stage the data on S3. If you are using Azure, then this data gets stored on ADLS Gen 2. If you are going to use a local cluster, then the data gets stored on a local disk. Also, you can use S3 or Gen 2. So for GCP and Azure, which are non-managed identity, you need to create a kind of explicitly create a Gen 2 or a GCS connection, and then like you need to specify those connection details under the advanced cluster runtime configurations. If this connection is not specified, then if you forgot or if you are not specified this connection, then internally Informatica creates a runtime the connections. For GCP, like which is currently not supported, but for Azure, we kind of create a connection by using a managed identity setup on agent. So say assume that like you are going to run an advanced mapping, but thing is that like you are not configured any advanced elastic cluster. In such cases, like there is a default elastic clusters which Informatica started supporting from the previous release. So what it does is that, like, say suppose your runtime is not associated to any elastic cluster, but you are running advanced mapping. As soon as like you run advanced mapping, Informatica understands that runtime is not associated to any advanced clusters, and then like it creates a single node local Spark clusters, the Kubernetes clusters on your agent machine. Note, this is just like single node clusters. You would see a you would not see a better performance. So it is not recommended for production. So, but you can still use it for development or like POC purposes. But when you use Elastic clusters with local mode or local clusters, then we support RHEL 8, 7 or 8, and then Amazon Linux 2 operating systems, and then like make sure like you have a sudo privileges in order to install Kubernetes libraries, and then make sure like you disabled the firewall system firewalls. And the staging happens on local agent machine, or like if you really wanted to use a staging even in S3 or ADL agent 2, it is still supported. You can go and change anytime the staging location. By default, it kind of uses a /temp directory under the agent machine. Usually internally it uses a Hadoop FSV2 connection for staging the connections, and once uh, uh, like when you create a mapping is executed for the like this is only happening only when you run a the first mapping which executes on the advanced mode. So the cluster life cycles is only started when the mapping has a Spark task. Say suppose if you have advanced mapping, but like say suppose you are just reading from SQL source and then you are writing back to SQL source, then though it is an advanced mapping, but like the connectors which are being used are kind of native connectors, hence like it will not even create a Spark. So Spark clusters are getting created only the kind of clusters gets created only if the mapping has any Spark tasks. And talk about the cluster metadata is always created even if mapping does not have any Spark tasks. This is just for like cleaning up the task to work. And then the cluster is started in the beginning of the workflow. This allows the CDI not to wait for the cluster if any before Spark task. That means like say suppose you have a CDI task as a read and then like the Spark task as a write. So if you wait like the CDI task to complete and then like if you start the cluster, then it might take again 6 to 7 minutes of time to start the cluster, right? So to avoid such time, so we start we start the cluster even before it start reading the data from your source. So the Spark task waits for the cluster to be ready, and then these logs will have all the entry about when the cluster is started, all the details. So now let's go and see the demo. As you see this mapping is having a source. The source is a SQL server, and then the target is a Amazon S3 V2. So it is a clear evidence that like any V2 connectors or any DSQL connectors are supported with an advanced mode, and any native connectors are supported with a CDI mode. So here, this is a purely a hybrid mapping, which reads the read has on CDI supported connector, the write has a CDI Elastica, the advanced connector supported, right? So in such cases, like now, if I want to run this mapping, maybe let me just show the runtime once. Currently, I'm going to run this mapping on the CDI runtime. So if you see my advanced cluster, currently, I don't have any runtime which are associated to CDI runtime, right? So that means that like whenever I now go and run this advanced mapping, so Informatica by default, it creates a local cluster, which we call it as a local cluster. It creates on this particular Linux agent box. It will be just like a single node machine. Now, if I just quickly run this mapping, I can just show how the cluster getting created. So I've already run on mapping. Maybe let me just show this mapping. Now, if you see this mapping has now, if you see the runtime plan, it has divided into two different phases. As a source phase, it is going to run as a CDI task. And then like there is a target phase because the V2 is something supported only on the Spark. So the Spark is kind of submitted to a target. The target is S3, so that's why it is submitted to Spark. So the Spark runs on the cluster side, right? So this is about the hybrid mapping and like the unified platform. We would like to hear from you. Please write us to supportvideos@informatica.com. Also, you can follow us on twitter.com/infosupport. Thank you.